The Syrian revolution in 2011 was a pivotal moment in modern history, making the beginning of the conflict that would reshape the country and deeply affect millions of lives.
It's 2011 and a spark has been lit. The Arab Spring sweeping across the Middle East and North Africa, toppling despotic regimes one by one. In the Syrian capital, Damascus, journalist Ali Al-Ibrahim is studying for a master's degree at university when the protests reach the surrounding streets.
I remember that time was filled with tension and uncertainty. Many were hopeful, believing change was possible, especially after seeing the regimes in Tunisia and Egypt fall. Protesters took to the street in cities like Idlib, Damascus, Aleppo, Homs, and Daraa, chanting slogans like freedom and the people want the downfall of the region.
It was a hopeful moment that something might be about to change. Then, the government of President Bashar al-Assad responded.
The Syrian regime response was swift and harsh. Security forces and the military and the army opened fire on demonstrators, and reports of torture and disappearances began, and peaceful protests quickly turned into a brutal war by the Syrian regime.
I'm Nicola Kelly, and this is Silenced. Today, Syria and the war the world forgot. How can investigative journalism bring the eyes of the world back to those who've been left behind?
It started here. Graffiti sprayed on this school wall called on President Assad to go. Teenage boys arrested, allegedly tortured. Anger boiled over. The first major protest happened here. Security forces struck back.
I remember seeing pictures around that time, and it was quite a stark contrast between the protesters, many of whom were holding roses and sort of offering them to the security forces, weren't they? And the sort of contrast between that and then the brutality of the response from the authorities was really shocking to much of the world. Can you tell us a bit about that? What it felt like to be out on the streets?
I am one of those people. I was arrested simply because I had a phone and was filming. Unfortunately, the Syrian regime didn't have any other solution, just have a military and security solution, and starting to arrest and kill the people when they are starting to say we need to make a change.
Images, first of the Assad regime's brutal crackdowns on peaceful protesters, and later of ISIS, known to the Arab world as Daesh, were beamed around the world.
The Islamic Army, known as ISIS, has seized vast territory in Syria and Iraq. Now, have a look at what they're doing to the minority Shiite Muslims. In this video, Shiite men are herded together and executed in mass graves.
But over time, as is so often the case, the story changed, attention shifted to other conflict-ravaged nations, and Syria was no longer making international headlines.
The international media coverage of the war in Syria has evolved over time. During the initial years, there was intense focus in the Syrian regime, followed by coverage when ISIS or Daesh emerged as a major force. The brutality of ISIS drew global attention. However, the situation on the ground is still dear for many Syrians. But the conflict has become more complex. and less headline gripping and without the same level of clear-cut battles or shocking developments. The international media has shifted its focus.
Seeing a gap in the media coverage, Ali began to investigate some of the human rights abuses happening inside Syria. He spoke to prisoners who'd been tortured inside regime prisons and looked at the plight of those living in besieged areas encircled by Daesh militants. His reporting was to set him on a new and dangerous course.
Yes, I have faced personal security threats as a result of my work in investigative journalism, especially in relation to sensitive topics. So, some of these specific threats I have encountered, including physical threats. My house was bombed and my mother and sister was killed. I received many calls, messages, and threats asking me to stop my work. They even threatened my wife and my friends. And these threats sometimes prevent you from working to your full potential, especially when I lost my mother and my sister. So the Syria regime dropped a barrel bombing in my house, and my mother and my sister killed just because I am a journalist.
I'm so sorry to hear about your mum and your sister. That must have been incredibly traumatic to experience. Do you know whether your house was targeted because of your work as a journalist? Like, had you received any warnings or anything before that happened?
Uh, I remember when I'm starting the first investigation reporting and publishing this investigation, it's that time about the chemical weapons Syrian regime using to kill people in North Syria. And I get a barrel bombing and serial number for this barrel, and the international organization using this investigation as evidence that Syria regime using this barrel. So after that, I receiving messages from the Syria regime and from army. If you didn't stop, we will kill you or kill your family. So I feel personally, yes, that's because I am doing some investigation reporting. So unfortunately, more 500 journalists killed in Syria and thousands more of these journalists' families arrested or killed. So I am one of these number. I'm not alone.
But the killing of his mother and sister didn't stop him. In fact, rather than putting him off, rather than deterring him from investigating these grave human rights abuses, it spurred him on. Honouring their memory became Ali's primary focus.
I want to be a journalist, so that's the story for my mother and my sister and millions of the victims in Syria are not forgotten and remain in people's memory. I believe that every story published is a form of accountability for those involved in the violation. I want to be a journalist because I have always been driven by strong sense of justice and a desire to uncover the truth. Journalism for me is not just about reporting events, but also shining a light on issues that's often unnoticed or are hidden. It's about holding power to account and giving a voice to those who are silenced or marginalized. Of course, you're feeling some trauma, you're feeling tired, you're feeling you can't continue your work, but you didn't have other solution. Just you have one way to continue, to make a new investigation, and to uncover new stories, and to highlight this violation.
Eventually, it became too dangerous for Ali to stay in Syria. Like millions of others, he fled, in his case, seeking refuge in Sweden.
That's one of the most hard decisions in my life, to leaving Syria and to see like your mother and your sister and your friend underground because they are killed just because you are a journalist, and then to leaving Syria. But when I decided to leave Syria, I need to continue to do some work with international media. And that's what's happening now.
To help gather more evidence to hold the regime to account, Ali founded Siraj, an investigative journalism unit which specialises in cross-border investigations. From his base in Sweden, he began to work with reporters still inside Syria and elsewhere in the region. But investigating what's going on inside his country has not been without its challenges.
The region has been known to monitor communication, which pose risk for these I work with inside Syria. I rely on sometimes making some strategy to save my source and my local journalism. I verify claims by cross-referencing information from multiple independent sources. I seek out document, photo or video that can confirm our story. I calibrate it also with the expert in field and with international organizations to help us to building our story and to verification the evidence. Also, the technology help us a lot when we are outside Syria to make and to building our story, to make investigation support by evidence.
But it's not easy to keep these stories in the headlines. Ali says that in order to place stories with major international media outlets, he and his colleagues at Siraj have learned to look at the impacts of the war far beyond the region.
Like, for example, I recently investigated the Syrian companies that were recruiting Syrians to fight alongside the Russian army in Ukraine. After exposing these companies, the EU Parliament added this company to the sanction list. So we can create an impact many times through our investigation. And also I worked in last year an investigation and a story about how the Syrian regime was receiving cash money, dollar and euro, from Berlin and Stockholm and London through the embassies abroad by transferring money in diplomatic bag. So this expose led to cutting of a significant source of financial incomes of region after receiving these methods. So of course we can make impact and we can make a change through our investigation.
And what are the challenges of doing an investigation like that across, a major cross-border investigation into Europe as well? How do you verify some of the information that you've got? And do you have a network of reporters that you work with across Europe?
Of course, one of the challenges is most of outlet media now didn't have enough funding to making investigation. Investigation reporting need funding, need time, need staff, it's need the experience team. And one of the big challenges, it's to have a funding to make this investigation. One of our investigation maybe take 1 or 2 years. So it's needed fund and needed experience and needed time. So we try to find some solution to these challenges and try to get some funding through this international organization and continue our work.
Ali hopes that their investigations will someday be used to hold the regime accountable. In fact, their reporting is already being used by some international organizations like the UN.
Yes, because as you know, as investigative journalism, every word in our investigation support by evidence and by proof. So we're using evidence and we're using proof, and that's helping the court and helping international organizations like United Nations and international organization call us a lot of times to get more evidence from us and more reporting and more details from our investigation and using this as evidence in their work. So, of course, they're using our work and using our investigation as evidence. And that's because we are just using our skills and knowledge and using evidence and using proof to support our investigation, because we try to make a change.
Do you have a sense, or do you think that that day of reckoning will ever come, that the regime and Daesh will ever be held to account for what they've done?
It's like not now, of course, but if you take a look from like your memory, a lot of war after several years, they are starting to put them accountable and starting put in the court. So of course we know it's not now, but I believe if we making this evidence and if we making this investigation will help us to save our memory and to save the victims, and also in the future to help the accountability to make a peace for everyone killed inside Syria.
And just lastly, where do you think the war is going? What do you think a future Syria looks like?
Unfortunately, Syria has entered the phase where the conflict seems more like stalemate. Syria has become a battleground for regional and international power like Russia and Iran. All have stakes in the conflict. Each country is using Syria to advance its geopolitical interests. In my personal opinion, as long as the Syrian regime stay in power, the war will continue. This is what the Syrian people said. Syria need the change. We need a political solution. We need the future Syria without the Syrian regime. We need all together to continue and to make a change. And I believe the journalism is one of the tools to make a change and to help the victim to build our future and to stop this madness.
You've been listening to Silenced. I'm Nicola Kelly. The producer was Kevin Caners. This is a podcast series for Article 19.